a bird that picks up seeds. The word also carries the thought of one who picks up scraps of knowledge and repeats such without order or method. Those philosophers disdained Paul and his message. Basically, the Epicurean philosophy was that the obtaining of pleasure, particularly mental pleasure, was the chief good in life. 1 Cor 15:32. Though it acknowledged gods, it explained these as being beyond human experience and concern. The philosophy of the Stoics stressed fate or natural destiny. One should be of high virtue, but strive for indifference to pain or pleasure. Neither Epicureans nor Stoics believed in the resurrection. O textoi acute miritra longo, Phoenicia 635. All toward Jehovah was counted to him as righteousness, and God made a covenant for the priesthood to remain in his line to time indefinite. New 25. 1-3, 6-15. PS 106. 30, 31. During his lifetime Phoenix served in various capacities. He was the priestly representative in the army that executed Jehovah's vengeance upon Midian. New 31. 3, 6. When it was thought that 3 tribes were forsaking Jehovah's worship, he headed a group of investigators. Jos 22. 9-33. He was chief of the tabernacle gatekeepers. 1 Ch 9. 20. After the burial of his father in the hill of Phinehas, he served in the office of high priest. Jos 24. 33. JG 20. 27, 28. His name is prominent in several postexilic genealogies. 1 Ch 6. 4, 50. Es 7. 5. 8. 2. 2. The younger of the 2 good-for-nothing sons of priest Eli. 1 1. 3. 2. 12. While serving as priests, he and his brother Hophani cohabited with women at the sanctuary and treated the offering of Jehovah with disrespect. 1 2. 13-17, 22. When feebly reprimanded by their father, they refused to hear. For their wickedness God pronounced judgment against them. It was fulfilled when they were both killed on the same day in battle with the Philistines. 1 2. 23-25, 34. 3. 13. 4. 11. News about the capture of the ark and the deaths of her father-in-law and her husband was too much for Phinehas' wife. She was thrown into shock and died giving birth to Ichabod. 1 4. 17-21. 3. A Levite, whose son Eleazar helped inventory the temple treasures in the time of Ezra, 468 BCE. Ezrate. 33, 34. Phlegon Phlegon burning. One of the Roman Christians whom Paul greets in his letter. Row 16. 14. Phoebe Phoebe pure. Bright. Radiant. A Christian sister of the first-century congregation in Cenchreae. Paul, in his letter to the Christians at Rome, recommends this sister to them and calls on them to render her any needed assistance as one who proved to be a defender of many, yes, of me myself. Row 16. 1, 2. It may be that Phoebe delivered Paul's letter in Rome or else accompanied the one who did. Paul refers to Phoebe as a minister of the congregation that is in Cenchreae. This raises the question as to the sense in which the term diakonos minister is here used. Some translators view the term in an official sense and hence render it deaconess rs, JB. But the scriptures make no provision for female ministerial servants. Goodspeed's translation views the term in a general sense and translates it helper. However, Paul's reference is evidently to something having to do with the spreading of the good news, the Christian ministry, and he was speaking of Phoebe as a female minister who was associated with the congregation in Cenchreae. Compare 2. 17, 18. Phoebe served as a defender of many. The term translated defender *station has the basic sense of protectress or succorer, so that it implies not mere cordiality but a coming to the aid of others who are in need. It may also be rendered patroness. Phoebe's freedom to travel and to render notable service in the congregation may indicate that she was a widow and possibly a woman of some material wealth. So, she may have been in position to use influence in the community in behalf of Christians who were being wrongly accused, defending them in this way. or she may have provided refuge for them in time of danger, serving as a protectress. The record gives no details. Phoenicia fo middle.nicia likely from a root meaning palm tree. That strip of coastland along the eastern shore of the Mediterranean between Syria and Israel that was bounded on the east by the Lebanon mountains. It roughly corresponded to the modern country of Lebanon. For many years the principal city of ancient Phoenicia was Sidon, but later it was eclipsed in importance by Tyre, a city founded by a colony from Sidon. See Sidon, Sidonians. Tyre. Geographic features. The coastal plains of this long, O-textoi acute Muritra longo, Phoenix 636. However, in time the Greeks preferred to call these Canaanite Sidonians by yet another term, Phoenicians. So it was that Canaanite, Sidonian, and Phoenician were names sometimes used interchangeably for the same people. In Isaiah's prophecy, for example, Phoenicia is termed Canaan. Issa 23. 11. JP. RS. NW, FTN. Land of seafaring traders. The Phoenicians were among the great seafaring peoples of the ancient world. Their ships were very seaworthy for their size. They were high both at the bow and at the stern, of wide beam, and could be powered by both sails and oars. As 27. 3-7 Phoenician vessels handled much of the commerce on the Mediterranean. In the 11th century BCE Solomon employed Phoenician servants of Hiram to accompany his ships going to Tarshish, Spain. 2ch9. 21 Phoenician sailors were also used aboard Solomon's fleet sent from Ezion-Geber to Ophir. 1 Chi 9. 26-28. 10. 11 In the 7th century BCE Phoenician vessels were still sailing to Tarshish and bringing back silver, iron, tin, and lead. As 27. 12. Arts and crafts. Phoenician metal workers were skilled in casting, hammering, and engraving objects of gold and silver. Other artisans specialized in carving wood and ivory, fashioning glassware, weaving wool and linen, and dyeing cloth. Phoenicia was especially noted for her purple dye industry. Royal or Tyrian purple robes commanded the highest prices, for many thousands of murex, shellfish, each yielding but a single drop of dye, were needed for a few yards of cloth. The dye varied in hue, depending on where along the shores of the Mediterranean the shellfish were found, and this fact, plus the special skills of the Phoenician dye masters who often used a double or triple dyeing process, resulted in many varieties of costly fabrics that were sought after by those of rank and nobility. As 27. 2, 7, 24. In the time of David and Solomon, the Phoenicians were famous as cutters of building stones and as woodsmen skilled in bringing down the stately trees of their forests. 2 Sa 5. 11. 1 Chi 5. 1, 6-10, 18. 9. 11. 1 Ch 14. 1. Religion. As Canaanites, the Phoenicians practiced a very base religion centered around the fertility god Baal. It involved sodomy, bestiality, and ceremonial prostitution, as well as abhorrent rites of child sacrifice. See picture, Volume 1, p. 739. Canaan, Canaanite no. 2 Conquest of Canaan by Israel. The Phoenician city of Baalbek c. 65 km 40 mi of Beirut became one of the great centers of polytheistic worship in the ancient world. In Roman times great temples to various gods and goddesses were erected there, the ruins of which can be seen today. In the spring of 31 CE certain residents of Phoenicia demonstrated faith by traveling inland to Galilee to listen to Jesus and to be cured of their ailments. Mr. 3. 7-10. Lu 6. 17 A year or so later, Jesus visited the coastal plains of Phoenicia and was so impressed by the faith of a Syro-Phoenician woman living there that he miraculously cured her demon-possessed daughter. Mount 15. 21-28. Mr. 7. 24-31. When persecution broke out in Judea following the martyrdom of Stephen, some Christians fled to Phoenicia. There, for some time, they proclaimed the good news only to Jews. But following the conversion of Cornelius, Congregations that had a mixture of Jews and non-Jews began to spring up along the Phoenician coast as well as in other parts of the Roman Empire. The Apostle Paul visited some of these congregations in Phoenicia during the course of his travels. The last recorded visit with believers there was at Sidon, when he was on his way to Rome as a prisoner in about 58 CE. Act 11. 19. 15. 3. 21. 1-7. 27. 1-3. Phoenix from a root meaning palm tree. A harbor of Crete. Act 27. 12. The grain boat on which Paul was traveling as a prisoner to Rome attempted to sail from Fair Havens to Phoenix for winter anchorage. Seized by a storm, it was subsequently Otextoi acute Miritra Longo, Pig 637 Phrygia Phrygia Middle. A country or region in Central Asia Minor. The geographic boundaries of Phrygia fluctuated greatly over the years, so it is difficult to define the area encompassed unless one refers to a specific period. In the 1st century, Phrygia was an inland area in the Roman provinces of Galatia and Asia, covering the plateau country end of the Taurus Range, from the Halys River on the E to the upper valleys of the Hermus and Meander rivers on the W. The Apostle Paul traveled through portions of Phrygia on at least 2 of his trips. Acts 16. 6. 18. 23. 19. 1. It is commonly believed that the Phrygians migrated from Thrace toward the close of the 2nd millennium BCE and gained control of much of Central and Western Asia Minor and of the Taurus Mountains, from the Halys River to the Aegean Sea. Archaeological evidence points to Gordium as their capital and King Midas as one of their prominent rulers. A noteworthy aspect of the religion of the people of early Phrygia is the worship of a mother goddess Rhea Cybele. The western part of Phrygia came under the control of the Attalid kings of Pergamum. This kingdom became the Roman province of Asia, but this portion is often referred to as Asian Phrygia. See Asia. The king of Galatia ruled the more easterly section of Phrygia, and it eventually formed a part of the Roman province of Galatia. This eastern section is sometimes termed Galatian Phrygia. It was N of Pisidia and NW of Lycaonia. Depending on the point of view of the writer and the time period involved, Antioch and Iconium might be called Phrygian cities, though often Antioch is connected with Pisidia, and Iconium with Lycaonia. Act 13. 14. See Antioch no. 2. Iconium. The population of Phrygia included many Jews, their presence having been encouraged by the Seleucid rulers in Syria. According to Josephus, Antiochus 3223-187 BCE transported 2,000 Jewish families with their effects from Mesopotamia and Babylonia to Lydia and Phrygia in order to stabilize conditions among the seditious people there. Jewish Antiquities, 12, 149 3, foreign Jews evidently continue to be numerous in Asia Minor under the Romans. On Pentecost 33 CE there were present in Jerusalem Jews from the district of Asia, and Phrygia and Pamphylia. Act 2. 9, 10. On his second missionary tour, Paul and his companions, coming NW through Cilicia and Lycaonia, went through Phrygia and the country of Galatia, because they were forbidden by the Holy Spirit to speak the word in the district of Asia. Act 15. 41. 16. 1-6 So they had entered the eastern part of Old Phrygia, which by Paul's time was Galatian Phrygia, but instead of continuing W through the province of Asia containing Asian Phrygia, they went in toward the province of Bithynia and then W to Troas. Paul's third tour took him through Galatian Phrygia and Asian Phrygia. He left Antioch in Pisidia and went from place to place through the country of Galatia and Phrygia. Act 18. 23 The account also says that he went through the inland parts and came down to Ephesus on the Aegean coast. Act 19. 1 It seems that he did not travel the main road to Ephesus, passing down the Lycus River Valley and by the Phrygian cities of Laodicea, Colossae, and Hierapolis. Col 2. 1. 4. 13, but, instead, took a more direct route somewhat to the NC Colossae. Phygellus Phi Middle. Gellus. 1 From the district of Asia who turned away from Paul. 2t1. 15. See Asia. Phylactery. See scripture containing case. Physician. See diseases and treatment. Pibaseth Pi Middle. Piseth from Egyptian, meaning house of the goddess Bastet. a city mentioned along with Heliopolis at Ezekiel 30. 17 in a prophecy directed against Egypt. The Septuagint rendering of the text identifies Pibeseth with Bubastes, an ancient city of the Delta region, the remains of which are at El Basta, about 70 kilometers 43 mi of Cairo, near the modern Otextoi acute Muritra Longo, Pigeon 638 Pigeon Heb. Yo middle.na, go middle.zal young pigeon or fledgling. Gr. Pe middle.rear middle.ste middle.ra. As noted under the heading dove, the same Hebrew word yo middle.na is applied to both the dove and the pigeon. Similarly, in English the distinction between the two birds is not sharply defined, although the name pigeon is usually applied to the larger types and especially to those that are domesticated and thus immigrating. Like the dove, the pigeon is a stout-bodied, short-legged bird with smooth and compact plumage. As a rule, Bible translations render the Hebrew yo middle.na as pigeon only in texts involving sacrifices, in which turtle doves heb. To middle.rem are also regularly mentioned. The expression young pigeon snw, kjrs in Hebrew is literally son esave or the pigeon. Along with turtle doves, pigeons were acceptable for sacrificial use in burnt offerings La 1. 14. A pair could be presented by those too poor to afford a female lamb or kid for a guilt offering or 5. 5-7. A pigeon or else a turtle dove as a sin offering was to accompany the offering of a young ram in a woman's purification rites following delivery of a child unless she lacked the ability to present the ram, in which case 2 young pigeons were acceptable or 12. 6-8 as was the case in Mary's purification following the birth of Jesus. Luke 2. 22-24. And a pair of either pigeons or turtle doves was to be included in the purification offerings of a person who had recovered from a running discharge. La 15. 13, 14, 28, 29. They were also acceptable in connection with the Nazirit's cleansing from defilement. New 6. 10. While many families among the Jews doubtless had their own pigeons, the expression, now if he does not have the means for 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, evidently indicates that they were often purchased for sacrificial purposes. The 5. 11. The Hebrew term go middle.zal, used in the account of Abraham's offering when Jehovah concluded with Abram a covenant, is understood to refer to a young pigeon. G 15. 9, 18. This is because of the constant association of the pigeon with the turtle dove in sacrifices prescribed in the law later given to Israel. The same Hebrew word is rendered fledgling in Deuteronomy 32. 11. A pigeon doubtless formed part of the earlier sacrifice by Noah, since that sacrifice included some of all the clean flying creatures. G8. 20. The provision of the law in making optional the use of either young pigeons or turtle doves was a helpful arrangement for the Jews, inasmuch as most turtle doves migrated from the land of Israel during the winter months, while the non-migratory pigeons were available the year round. The pigeon is a strong, swift flyer, able to reach speeds of over 80 km/h 50 miles per hour. Its homing instinct caused it to be used for carrying messages from early times. Unlike human navigators who must use chronometers and sextants to determine their position, homing pigeons almost instantly know by sensing the Earth's magnetic field and from the position of the sun which direction to fly, even though released in strange territory hundreds of kilometers from their homes. They automatically allow for the movement of the sun across the sky so that the angle of their flight does not err. As common as chickens in many parts of the earth, pigeons differ from domestic fowl not only in their flying ability, but also in their structure and in the fact that they are monogamous. Different from the rooster, the faithful male pigeon aids the female in building the nest and in incubating the eggs. Pigeons differ from all other birds in their distinct manner of feeding their young with pigeon's milk, a curd-like substance produced within the parent's crop. Young pigeons, called squabs, are commonly used as food in many lands. Pihahiroth pi middle.hiroth. The last camping site of the Israelites before crossing the Red Sea. New 33. 7, 8 after Otextoi acute Muritra Longo, Pilate 639 which begins about 25 km 16 mi of Suez. This view, however, is accompanied either by a denial of the miraculous nature of the crossing, claiming that the crossing was only through a marsh or swamp, or by the idea that the northern end of the Red Sea anciently ran up into the Bitter Lakes region and that the waters there were of much greater depth at that time, whereas archaeological evidence is that there has been very little change in the water level from ancient times. For this reason, the suggestion advanced by earlier scholars of the 19th century still seems to be that which meets best the requirements of the Bible history. Pi-Hahiroth is evidently a site on the narrow plain running along the southeastern foot of Jebel Attica, about 20 kilometers 12 miles of Suez. It is suggested that the crossing started from the promontory called Ras Attica and led across the seabed to the vicinity of the oasis Ayn Musa on the opposite shore. The seabed in this section descends quite gradually from either shore, because of shoals that run out 3 kilometers 2 mi from either side. The maximum depth of water near the middle of this trajectory is about 15 meters, 50 feet. The distance from shore to shore is about 10 kilometers 6 mi, allowing ample space for the possibly 3 million Israelites to be traversing the seabed while, at the same time, the military forces of Pharaoh were also making their way through the miraculously provided passage in an effort to overtake the Israelite host. See Exodus, route of the Exodus. This view coincides generally with the tradition handed down by Josephus, Jewish historian of the 1st century CE, that the Israelites prior to the crossing were confined between inaccessible cliffs and the sea. Jewish Antiquities, 2, 324-15, 3. A turning back of the Israelite nation from Etham to the place described above would also harmonize well with Jehovah's forecast that Pharaoh would say of them, "They are wandering in confusion in the land. The wilderness has closed in upon them." X 14. 3. This would hardly be true of locations N of Suez. The location of Pi-Hahiroth in the vicinity of Jebel Attica would likewise allow for Pharaoh's forces to advance rapidly on the fleeing Israelites by regularly traveled route from Memphis, the likely capital of Egypt at that time, to the Sinai Peninsula. X 14. 4-9. While satisfying the geographic requirements, such location of Pi-Hahiroth must be viewed as only tentative, dependent on possible future confirmation. Pilate, Roman governor of Judea during Jesus' earthly ministry. Luke 3. 1. After Herod the Great's son Archelaus was removed from being ethnarch over Judea, provincial governors were appointed by the emperor to rule the province, Pilate evidently being the fifth of these. Tiberius appointed him in 26 CE and his rule lasted 10 years. Little is known of Pontius Pilate's personal history. The only period of his life to receive historical notice is his Judean governorship. The one inscription known bearing his name was found in 1961 at Caesarea. It also refers to the Tiberoum, a building Pilate dedicated in honor of Tiberius. As the emperor's representative, the governor exercised full control of the province. He could impose the death sentence, and according to those endorsing the view that the Sanhedrin could pass the death sentence, the governor's ratification had to be obtained by that Jewish court for such sentence by them to be valid. Compare Mount 26. 65, 66. Joe 18. 31. As the official residence of the Roman ruler was at Caesarea, compare 23. 23, 24. The main body of Roman troops was stationed there, with a smaller force garrisoned at Jerusalem. Customarily, however, the governor resided at Jerusalem during festival seasons such as at Passover time and brought up military reinforcements with him. Pilate's wife was with him in Judea. Mount 27. 19. This being possible, because of inscription discovered o textoi acute miritra longo, Pilate 640. An earlier change in Roman governmental policy concerning governors in dangerous assignments. Pilate's tenure of office was not a peaceful one. According to the Jewish historian Josephus, Pilate made a bad start as to his relations with his Jewish subjects. He sent Roman soldiers bearing standards with images of the emperor on them into Jerusalem at night. This move provoked great resentment. A delegation of Jews traveled to Caesarea to protest the presence of the standards and call for their removal. After 5 days of discussion, Pilate sought to frighten the petitioners with the threat of execution by his soldiers, but their determined refusal to yield caused him to accede to their request. Jewish Antiquities, 18, 55-59-3, 1. Philo, a Jewish writer of the 1st century CE in Alexandria, Egypt, describes a somewhat similar act by Pilate evoking protest, this time involving gold shields bearing the names of Pilate and Tiberius, which shields Pilate placed in his quarters at Jerusalem. A Jewish appeal went to the emperor at Rome, and Pilate was ordered to remove the shields to Caesarea. The embassy to Gase, XXXVIII, 299-305. Josephus lists yet another disturbance. To construct an aqueduct to bring water into Jerusalem from a distance of about 40 kilometers 25 mi, Pilate used money from the temple treasury at Jerusalem. Large crowds clamored against this act when Pilate made a visit to the city. Pilate sent disguised soldiers to mix in with the multitude and, at a signal, to attack them, resulting in Jews being injured and some being killed. Jewish Antiquities, 18, 60-62-3, 2. The Jewish War, 2, 175-177-9, 4. Apparently the project was carried through to completion. This latter conflict is often suggested as the occasion when Pilate mixed the blood of Galileans with their sacrifices, as recorded at Luke 13. 1. From this expression it appears that these Galileans were slain right in the temple area. There is no way of determining if this incident relates to that described by Josephus or is a separate occasion. However, since the Galileans were subjects of Herod Antipas, the district ruler of Galilee, this slaughter may have been at least a factor contributing to the enmity that existed between Pilate and Herod up until the time of Jesus' trial. Luke 23. 6-12. Trial of Jesus. On Nisan 14, 33 CE at dawn, Jesus was brought by the Jewish leaders to Pilate. As they would not enter the Gentile ruler's premises, Pilate went out to them and inquired as to the charge against Jesus. The charges were that Jesus was subversive, was advocating non-payment of taxes, and was saying he was a king, thus rivaling Caesar. Told to take Jesus and judge him themselves, his accusers replied that it was not lawful for them to execute anyone. Pilate then took Jesus into the palace and questioned him concerning the charges. Picture, Volume 2, p. 741. Returning to the accusers, Pilate announced that he found no fault in the accused. The accusations continued, and upon learning that Jesus was from Galilee, Pilate sent him to Herod Antipas. Herod, displeased because Jesus refused to perform some sign, subjected him to mistreatment and ridicule and returned him to Pilate. The Jewish leaders and the people were again summoned, and Pilate renewed his efforts to avoid sentencing an innocent man to death, asking the crowd if they wanted Jesus released in accord with the custom of freeing a prisoner at each Passover festival. Instead, the crowd, incited by their religious leaders, clamored for the release of Barabbas, a robber, murderer, and seditionist. Repeated attempts by Pilate to free the accused brought only an increase in the shouting for Jesus' impalement. Fearing a riot and seeking to placate the crowd, Pilate acceded to their wishes, washing his hands with water as though cleansing them from blood guilt. Some time prior to this, Pilate's wife had advised him of her troublesome textoi acute miritra longo. Piles 641 actions of the Jews themselves were largely responsible for the strong measures the governor had taken against them. At any rate, the gospel accounts give some accurate insight into the man's makeup. His approach to matters was typical of the Roman ruler, his speech terse and blunt, outwardly expressing the skeptical attitude of the cynic, as in saying what is truth. He, nevertheless, showed fear, likely a superstitious fear, upon hearing that he was dealing with one who claimed to be God's son. Though obviously not the condescending type, he displayed the politician's lack of integrity. He was concerned primarily with his position, what his superiors would say if they heard of further disturbances in his province, fearful of appearing to be overly lenient toward those accused of sedition. Pilate recognized Jesus' innocence and the envy that motivated his accusers. Yet he gave in to the crowd and turned an innocent victim over for them to slaughter rather than risk damage to his political career. As part of the superior authorities, Pilate exercised power by divine tolerance. Row 13. When he bore responsibility for his decision, responsibility that water could not wash away. His wife's dream was evidently of divine origin, even as were the earthquake, the unusual darkness, and the rending of the curtain that took place on that day. Mount 27. 19, 45, 51-54. Luke 23. 44, 45. Her dream should have warned Pilate that this was no ordinary trial, no ordinary defendant. Yet, as Jesus said, the one delivering him to Pilate bore the greater guilt of sin. Joe 19. 10, 11. Judas, who originally betrayed Jesus, was called the son of destruction. Joe 17. 12. Those Pharisees who were guilty of complicity in a plot against Jesus' life were described as subjects for Gehenna. Mount 23. 15:33. Compare Joe 8. 37-44. And particularly the high priest, who headed the Sanhedrin, was responsible before God for handing over God's son to this Gentile ruler for sentencing to death. Mount 26. 63-66. Pilate's guilt did not equal theirs. Yet his act was extremely reprehensible. Pilate's distaste for the promoters of the crime evidently was reflected in the sign he had placed over the impaled Jesus, identifying him as the King of the Jews, as well as his curt refusal to change it, saying, "What I have written I have written." Joe 19. 19-22. When Joseph of Arimathea requested a dead body, Pilate, after first displaying the thoroughness of a Roman official by making sure Jesus was dead, granted the request. Mr. 15. 43-45. The concern of the chief priests and Pharisees over the possibility of theft of the body brought the terse reply, "You have a guard. Go make it as secure as you know how." Mount 27. 62-65. Removal on death. Josephus reports that Pilate's later removal from office resulted from complaints lodged by the Samaritans with Pilate's immediate superior, the governor of Syria, Vitellius. The complaint was about Pilate's slaughter of a number of Samaritans who were deluded by an impostor into assembling at Mount Gerizim in hopes of uncovering sacred treasures supposedly hidden there by Moses. Vitellius ordered Pilate to Rome to appear before Tiberius, and he put Marcellus in his place. Tiberius died in 37 CE, while Pilate was still on his way to Rome. Jewish Antiquities, 18, 85-87 4, 1. 18, 88, 89 4, 2. History gives no reliable data as to the ultimate results of his trial. The historian Eusebius of the late 3rd and early 4th centuries claims that Pilate was obliged to commit suicide during the reign of Tiberius' successor Caligula. The Ecclesiastical History, 2, 7, 1. Pildash. Sixth named of the 8 sons of Abraham's brother Nahor by his wife Milcah. GE 22. 21-23. 11. 29. Thiles. Hemorrhoids. Swellings of veins at the anus, frequently accompanied by bleeding. In this often painful disorder, there are vascular tumors beneath the mucous membrane textoid acute urethra longo. Pillar 642. Ancient peoples, particularly the Greeks and the Romans, invoked their deities for cures by presenting to them replicas of afflicted body parts, or they presented models thereof in gratitude for supposed cures. Since gerboas, mouse-like jumping rodents, were bringing the land to ruin 1 6. 5. Some scholars believe the Philistines were afflicted with bubonic plague, a highly fatal infectious disease marked by such symptoms as fever, chills, prostration, and painful enlargement of the lymphatic glands, or burbos. This plague is transmitted chiefly through bites by fleas that have bitten infected rats or other rodents that are dying or dead. A death-dealing confusion occurred when the ark was in Ekron, where the men that did not die had been struck with piles. 1 5. 10-12. Both pile and jerboa images are mentioned at 1 Samuel 6. 4, where the Philistine priests and diviners are quoted as saying, "Every one of you and your Axis lords have the same scourge." But this may mean only that the entire nation, the Axis lords and people alike, had suffered a common calamity, the same scourge, not necessarily that the rodents and the piles were associated in one epidemic disease or plague. The Bible seems to indicate only that the jerboas destroyed vegetation throughout Philistia, thus ruining the land, and does not specifically state that they were carriers of infection to the Philistines stricken by Jehovah. Pilha millstone. A family head of Israel or a representative of a family of that name attesting the post-exilic trustworthy arrangement. NE 9. 38. 10. 1, 14, 24. Pillar. An upright structural support or column, or something resembling or comparable to such a supporting column. Some ancient peoples of the Middle East set up sacred pillars in connection with their false religion. Quite likely these involved phallic symbolism. The Israelites, upon entering the Promised Land, were to destroy such sacred pillars, and they were forbidden to set up pillars of that sort. D7. 5. 16. 22. However, at times they took up heathen religion and used sacred pillars. 1 Chi 14. 23. 2 Chi 3. 2. See sacred pillar. Quite apart from the improper use of pillars hated by God, the Hebrew scriptures mention the setting up of pillars or stones of a commemorative nature. Such pillars were neither objects of idolatrous worship nor symbolic of sex organs. They served to recall historic acts or events. On 2 occasions Jacob set up stone pillars at Bethel. Both instances involved taking note of Jehovah's dealing with Jacob in a special way at that place. GE 28. 18, 19, 22. 31. 13. 35. 14. 15. The pillar Jacob stationed over Rachel's grave was no doubt stone and still existed in Moses' day. GE 35. 19, 20. When the Israelites accepted the laws Moses had received from God, Moses built an altar and 12 pillars corresponding with the 12 tribes of Israel. Acts 24. 4. Joshua gave similar instruction involving stones to represent the tribes, though the account does not call them pillars. These were to serve as a memorial to Israel and would give occasion for fathers to explain to their sons what the 12 stones meant. Jos 4. 1-9, 20-24. A covenant or a victory could be marked by setting up a stone, often a pillar. GE 31. 44-53. Jos 24. 26. 1-7. 10-12. After his victory over the Amalekites, King Saul erected a monument for himself at Carmel. 1-15. 12. The Hebrew word here translated monument is usually rendered hand, but it is also used at 2 Samuel 18. 18. In connection with the pillar Absalom raised up called Absalom's monument NW, at RS, so evidently Saul erected a victory monument or pillar. Compare Issa 56. 5. See Absalom. The idea of a pillar as a commemorative monument may be involved in the prophecy at Isaiah 19. 19. Written in the 8th century BCE, it dealt with circumstances after the destruction of Jerusalem in 607 BCE. Some of the Jews who were textoi acute miritra longo, pipe 643-7. 1-6. Compare Is 40. 16, 48, 49. Marble pillars were used in the courtyard of Ahasuerus' palace. As 1. 6. The most noteworthy pillars in Solomon's temple were 2 huge copper pillars named Jachin and Boaz in front of the porch. 1 Chi 7. 15. 2 Chi 25. 17. J 52. 21. See Capital. The New Bible Dictionary edited by J. Douglas 1985, p. 941 suggests that the king stood by one of these pillars on ceremonial occasions, but that cannot be confirmed, for the Bible merely says the king was standing by his pillar at the entry. 2 Ch 23. 13. 2 Chi 11. 14. 23. 3. He could have been standing at the gate of the inner court or some other elevated place for addressing the people. Smaller pillars were used in the tabernacle, 4 of acacia wood to support the curtain between the holy and most holy, and 5 to hold up the screen at the entrance. Acts 26. 32-37. 60 other pillars supported the linen hangings around the courtyard and the screen at the gate of the courtyard. Acts 27. 9-16. Small, ornamental pillars of silver apparently supported the canopy of Solomon's litter. K 3. 9, 10. Figurative use. The material and function of structural pillars made them fitting symbols of sturdy support. They would illustrate that which securely upholds. The Christian congregation could be called a pillar in support of the truth, for it upholds the truth in contrast to religious error. 1 T 3. 15. James, Cephas, and John were spoken of as seeming to be pillars in the early congregation. They were solidly fixed and strong supporters of it. 2. 9. Christians who conquer will be made pillars in the temple of God, gaining a permanent position in the spiritual structure. 3. 12. The idea of the sturdiness of a pillar is found in the allusions to pillars in describing the feet of a strong angel. Re 10. 1. The legs of the shepherd lover of the Shulamite girl were like pillars of marble, being beautiful as well as strong. Ca 5. 15. How long did the miraculous pillars of cloud and of fire remain with the camp of Israel? Jehovah miraculously guided the Israelites out of Egypt and through the wilderness, going ahead of them in the daytime in a pillar of cloud, and in the nighttime in a pillar of fire to give them light to go. Acts 13. 21. This was, not two pillars, but one pillar of fire and cloud that would normally appear as a cloud in the daytime and as fire at night. Acts 14. 24. When the Egyptians pursued the Israelites, the pillar moved to the rear, perhaps spreading out like a wall. PS 105. 38, 39. It caused darkness on the Egyptian side, but shed light on the Israelite side. Acts 14. 19, 20. When the tabernacle was set up, the pillar above it served as a sign that Jehovah was in his holy place. Acts 40. 35. The pillar represented Jehovah, and he spoke out of it. New 14. 14. 12. 5. PS 99. 7. The last historical notice of the pillar was just before Israel entered the Promised Land. 31. 15. When they were settled in their land, the guiding pillar was not needed as it had been during their wandering. Compare Acts 40. 38. Issa 4. 5. Pillory pillow middle ri. A device for confining the neck and arms. Used to punish offenders by exposing them to public ridicule. At Jeremiah 29. 26, pillory is translated from the Hebrew word tzi-middle-neck. From exile in Babylon, the false prophet Shemaiah wrote to the priests in Jerusalem, urging that Jeremiah be rebuked and put in the pillory. Piltai shortened form of Pilatia, meaning Jehovah has provided escape. Post-exilic head of the priestly paternal house of Modiah in the days of Jeshua's successor Joachim. Ne 12. 12, 17. Pim. The price that the Philistines charged the Israelites for sharpening various otextoi acute miritra longo, Piram 644. Those who handle the pipe or flute. GE 4. 21, FTN. This possibly indicates the establishment of a profession, either of craftsmen making the instruments or of those playing them. Although the U-middle.gave was never listed as one of the temple instruments, some scholars believe that this name became a general term, designating any woodwind. Originally, though, it may have been a specific instrument, perhaps the flute or possibly a series of multi-toned pipes all closed at one end and blown across the open ends. The instrument in Nebuchadnezzar's orchestra specified by the Aramaic word mash middle.ro middle.chi pipe, da 3. 5, 7, 10, 15. At, da, mo, nw, rs may correspond to the Hebrew u-middle.gave. Piram Zebra. The Amorite king of Jarmuth at the time Israel entered the Promised Land. Piram joined with 4 other Amorite kings in a conspiracy against the Gibeonites, who had made peace with Joshua. In the battle that followed, Piram and the other kings took refuge in a cave at Makeda, which the Israelites sealed up until the fighting was over. Piram and the others were then slain, hung on stakes until evening, and entombed in the same cave. Jos 10. 1-27. Pyrathan Pyra middle.than, Pyrathanite Pyr-a middle.thon middle.ite of belonging to Pyrathan. Pyrathan was a town of Ephraim in the mountain of the Amalekite. Evidently an inhabitant of Pyrathan was known as a Pyrathanite, as were Hillel and, later, Benaiah, one of David's mighty men. Hillel's son Judge Abdon was buried there. JG 12. 13, 15. 2 Sa 23. 8, 30. 1 Ch 11. 31. 27. 14 Farata, about 10 kilometers 6 MW of the suggested location for Shechem, has been suggested as a possible identification. Pisgah. An elevated place in the northern section of the Abarim mountain range immediately of the Dead Sea. The exact location is unknown. Bible references are not in conflict with its suggested identity with Ras Es Segar, a headland located about 16 kilometers 10 mi of where the Jordan empties into the Dead Sea. Ras Es Segar is a little NW of Jebel Umba, the summit traditionally known as Mount Nebo Ha Nebo. The physical features of these two elevations are in agreement with the Bible's brief description. Ras Es Segar is about 100 meters, 330 feet lower in elevation than Jebel Umba and is separated from the latter by a slight depression, or saddle. Though slightly lower than its neighbor summit, Ras Es Segar is closer to Jericho and affords an unobstructed view of the Dead Sea some 1,000 meters, 3,300 feet below, as well as a splendid view of the Jordan Valley, of the central range on which Hebron, Bethlehem and Jerusalem are situated, and of Mount Hermon over 160 kilometers 100 mi to the end. The first mention of this place is in connection with the campsites along the line of Israel's march toward the Promised Land. New 21. 20. It was located in the southern part of that territory taken in the conquest of the Amorites after their king, Sihon, refused to let the Israelites pass through the land. De 4. 46, 49. Jos 12. 1-3 Later, Balak the king of Moab took Balaam to the field of Zophim, to the top of Pisgah, in a vain attempt to have the Israelites cursed. New 23. 14. Pisgah, however, is best remembered in connection with Moses' extensive view of the Promised Land shortly before his death. De 3. 27. 34. 1-3 Pisgah was designated as part of Reuben's tribal territory. De 3. 16, 17. Jos 13. 15, 20. Wherever the name Pisgah occurs in the Bible, it is always qualified by such expressions as the head of, the top of, or the slopes of Pisgah. As a consequence, it is frequently referred to as Mount Pisgah, though not so in the scriptures. Pishon Pishon possibly, more scattered. One of the four rivers branching out from the river or issuing out of Eden and thereafter encircling the entire land of Havilah, a land stated to be the source of gold, bdellium gum, and onyx stone. GE 2. 10-12 The identification o textoi acute miritra longo, Piet 645 Pisidia pi middle.cito middle.8 interior region of southern Asia Minor. It was a mountainous section, taking in the western portion of the Taurus range, lying in of Pamphylia and S of Galatian Phrygia, with Caria and Lycia on the W and Lycaonia on the E. The region is believed to have been about 190 kilometers 120 mi from E to W and about 80 kilometers 50 mi in breadth. It had many lofty ridges cut by valleys and mountain rivers. There were forests and pasturelands. The people of Pisidia were wild and warlike, forming tribal bands of robbers. These mountaineers were difficult to control and slow to be affected by Hellenic or Roman culture. The Romans assigned Galatian king Amyntas the task of subjugating them, but he died before accomplishing it. Pisidia became part of the Roman province of Galatia in 25 BCE, and in 6 BCE colonies in the area were garrisoned to hold the people in check. These colonies were directed from Antioch, a city near the border between Pisidia and Phrygia. See Antioch No. 2. In 74 CE the southern part of Pisidia was combined with Pamphylia and Lycia into a Roman province. The northern section remained part of the province of Galatia until, in post-apostolic times, it was included in a new province bearing the name Pisidia. The Apostle Paul passed through Pisidia on his first missionary tour, traveling from coastal Pamphylia over the mountains to Pisidian Antioch. Act 13. 13, 14 He also passed through Pisidia on the return trip. Act 14. 21, 24 The bandits and rushing mountain rivers of the area might well have been a basis for Paul's statement that he has been in dangers from rivers, in dangers from highwaymen. 2 Co 11. 26. Pispa, a leading Asherot, son of Jether. 1 Ch 7. 38, 40. Pistachio nutheb. Bot middle.na. The fruit of the pistacia vero tree. This deciduous tree thrives in dry areas and seldom reaches a height in excess of 9 meters, 30 feet. The nuts measure 1.5 to 2 centimeters, 0.6 to 0.8 inches in length and grow in large clusters. The thin, but hard, light-colored shell of ripe pistachio nuts is covered with a somewhat wrinkly husk. Each nut contains one yellow-green kernel surrounded by thin reddish skin. The kernel has a mild, sweet flavor and is commonly eaten raw or fried. Sometimes kernels are pressed for oil, and ground kernels are used for confectionery items. Pistachio nuts were among the finest products of the land of Canaan that were brought as a gift by Jacob's sons to one who was a ruler in Egypt. GE 43. 11 Even in modern times large quantities of pistachio nuts have been exported from parts of the Middle East. The city of Betonim, situated east of the Jordan in the territory of Gad, appears to have been named after pistachio nuts. Jos 13. 24, 26. Pit. A deep or sunken place, either natural or artificial. The pits of bitumen into which the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fell were evidently natural sunken places in the area. GE 14. 10. Whereas the pit into which Joseph's brothers threw him was evidently a man-made water pit. GE 37. 20-29 The two principal Hebrew words for pit are also meaning water pit or cistern and sharchath. The Hebrew word Sheol is translated pit 3 times in the King James Version. New 16. 30, 33. Job 17. 16 However, Sheol actually refers to the common grave of mankind rather than to an individual grave. In Job 17. 13-16 we find Sheol in the pit Heb. Sharchath used in parallel by Job as places of darkness and dust. Similarly, David's prayer to God at Psalm 30. 3 says, O Jehovah, you have brought up my soul from Sheol itself. You have kept me alive, that I should not go down into the pit. In Psalm 88. 3-5 reference is made to Sheol, the pit, and the burial place in that order. See also Job 33. 18-30. PS 30. 3, 9. 49. 7-10, 15. 88. 6. 143. 7. PR 1. 12. ISLA 14. 9-15. 38. 17, 18. 51. 14. Seagrave. Sheol. Jonah also used the word for pit in a figurative sense when he compared Otex to a acute uretra longo, pitch 646 so wide for the first meter 3 feet down, and then the lower part widened out into a bulbous-shaped cavity. See cistern. The Greek word phrer, pit, in the expression at Revelation 9. 1, 2, pit of the abyss, is the same word that John uses in his Gospel account to describe the well at Jacob's fountain where Jesus met the Samaritan woman. Job 4. 11, 12 phrer in its simplest meaning refers to such a well or pit dug in the earth. It may, however, be used in referring to any pit or abyss, including the unfathomable one from which the locusts of the Revelation ascend. Re 9. 3. See abyss. The Greek word bodhi middle dot numbers, rendered pit, may also mean ditch. Mount 12. 11. 15. 14, FTN. Lu 6. 39 Peter, in 2 Peter 2. 4, speaks of the demon angels as confined to pits gr. Say middle dot rosh of dense darkness. See Tartarus. See also lion's pit. Pitch. The sticky, liquid form of bitumen, a dark-colored mixture of hydrocarbons similar to what is generally called tar. See bitumen. It is translated from the Hebrew word zetifeth. Mineral pitch is highly flammable and, unless kept well supplied with air, gives off great quantities of smoke when burning. Filling Edom's torrents with pitch and causing the land to become burning pitch with smoke ascending to time indefinite would be a fitting picture of devastating destruction. Isra 34. 9, 10 This description also helps to identify the substance, for Edom was near the Dead Sea, and even today bitumen is occasionally washed up on its shores, evidently coming from deposits now covered by the sea. According to Exodus 2. 3 The papyrus ark in which Moses was concealed was coated with both bitumen and pitch. Jewish commentator Rashi suggested that this meant bitumen on the inside and pitch on the outside. Or it could mean a mixture of two different consistencies of the same basic substance. For instance, in the land and the book. W.M. Thompson suggests that Exodus 2:3 reveals the process by which they prepare the bitumen. The mineral, as found in this country, melts readily enough by itself. But then, when cold, it is as brittle as glass. It must be mixed with tar while melting, and in that way it forms a hard, glassy wax, perfectly impervious to water. Revised by J. Grand, 1910, p. 200. The Greek Septuagint uses the single term a for apes a mixture of asphalt and pitch. In parts of the Middle East, mineral pitch has been used even in recent times as a coating for certain sailing vessels. Pithom Pitom from Egyptian, meaning house temple of Atum. One of two storage cities built by the enslaved Israelites in Egypt, the other being Ramses. X1. 11. No positive identification of the site has been made. Archaeologists have apparently been influenced in their conclusions by the popular view that the pharaoh of the Israelite oppression was Ramses II, a view that is not soundly founded. See Ramses, Ramesses. Pithom Python. A descendant of King Saul through Jonathan and Merib-Baal-Mephibosheth. 1 ch. 8. 33-35. 9. 39-41. Pity. A tender feeling toward persons in a state of suffering or in need, or toward anything that may have been treated in a harsh manner. The plural noun middle.com denotes pity, mercies, or inward emotions. G 43. 14, 30. 1 ch. 21. 13. PS 40. 11. See mercy. In Greek, the verbs plagmiddle.my means be moved with pity or compassion, have or feel pity. This term is drawn from the noun splagna, literally meaning intestines. Ac 1. 18. Since strong emotions can have an effect on the abdominal area of the body, the Greek noun splagna is often used to denote tender affections, or tender compassions. See affection. Jehovah God set the example in manifesting pity for those in distress, and he can move men to show this loving feeling. That is why King Solomon could appropriately pray that Jehovah would make the Israelites objects of pity before their captors if they became otextoi acute muritra longo, Plain Tree 647, and in welcoming all who sincerely repent of sin and make a wholehearted return to Jehovah. Mount 18. 21-35. Lu 10. 30-37. 15. 11-32. Thus they can rest assured of the Almighty's continued mercy toward them. Mount 5. 7. Plague. The Hebrew words that are rendered plague or scourge have the literal meanings touching, smiting, blow, defeat, and death. Jehovah God dealt blows as a punishment for rebellious murmuring. New 16. 41-50. Refusal to comply with his will. Zech 14. 12, 15, 18. The profane use of something sacred. 1 Sa 5. 1. 6. 4. Touching his anointed ones. Ge 12. 17. PS 105. 15. And unfaithfulness or violations of his law. 26. 21. New 14. 36, 37. 31. 16. De 28. 59-61. 1 ch. 21. 17, 22. 2 ch. 21. 12-15. Such blows might be administered by angelic or by human means. 2 Sa 24. 17. J 19. 1-8. 25. 8, 9. 49. 17. 50. 13, 14. Prayers of intercession by Jehovah's servants or sincere prayers by repentant ones were required for the removal of plagues sent by God. Ge 20. 17, 18. 1 Chi 8. 37, 38. 2 ch. 6. 28, 29. A plague could also result from the natural outworking of a person's sin. PR 6. 32, 33. It could be an affliction, such as the plague of leprosy. La 13. 2, or an adversity resulting from time and circumstance. PS 38. 11. 73. 5, 14. The plagues Jehovah visited upon Egypt in the time of Moses were manifestations of his great power and caused his name to be declared among the nations. X 9. 14, 16. For generations afterward their effects were talked about by other peoples. Jos 2. 9-10.